In today's episode, we talk about the combine, which prospects stood out, and who would make sense for the Houston Texans.
You are Locked On Texans, your daily Houston Texans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to a Monday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, plain and simple. I'm your Texans football analyst. On the other side of the screen, Texas Credential Media member, Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis just got back from Indianapolis. Of course, we are talking about the combine on today's show. If this is your first time listening or watching the Locked On Texans podcast, thank you for stopping by. Please subscribe, like, and comment to the podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. And thank you to all of our returning listeners coming back for another episode as we talk Texans. We are looking at Jaylan Ford, mid-round option for the Houston Texans who need to fill their linebacker role. There's some depth issues there, or Blake Cashman being a free agent, and more mid to late round options for this team. Which cornerback in this year's draft class, which my God, is some ballers that's coming out this year, would be a perfect number 2 to play alongside Derek Stingley? We open up looking at the defensive tackle unit, which, by the way, still has some great prospects coming out this year. Byron Murphy killed his combine. T. Sweat, he killed his combine. Chris Jenkins, and we're going to get into another guy. So without further ado, let's open up with which deep tackle fits for the Houston Texans. And before I pass it over to you, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. Cody, D tackles, Monsters Day. Them big boys was moving. And they was and they were impressive while doing it. Now I got who I think Houston should look at with maybe the 23rd overall pick or their second round pick. But you got a name up there not a lot of people are talking about.
Oh yeah. And that young man that you're talking about is Jalen Hunt. And before I start talking about Hunt, John, I do want to say the biggest takeaway from the NFL Combine, being there talking to several prospects on both sides of the ball, the number one takeaway is that everybody wants to play for D'Amico Ryans or play with C.J. Stroud. And to further prove my point, just take a look at Byron Murphy II on what he had to say about the possibility of playing for the Houston Texans.
Man, it'll mean a lot, getting drafted by Houston, also just staying in Texas, I'm familiar with that because I'm from Texas, but it'll mean a lot playing for D'Amico Ryan, a young African-American coach, so it'll mean a lot to me.
Byron, have you had a chance to meet with Mike Tomlin and the Steelers yet?
As you guys know, Byron Murphy was by far my number one prospect for the Houston Texans prior to the combine, and that hasn't changed. However, John, the best thing that I love about being at the combine is that I had an opportunity to really buckle down and study some of the prospects coming out in this year's draft that a lot of people may not know. A lot of people might not be talking about it. And this one guy that I'm looking at, Jalen Hunt, this young man played down the street at Houston Christian University. And he is a guy that I'm looking at and I'm saying to myself, he will be perfect for a statement that I made last week during our pre-combine mock draft when I said I do not see the Houston Texans leaving the 2024 draft without 2 defensive linemen. And if the Houston Texans have an opportunity to draft Hunt, I think he would be perfect for a late round steal for this organization. First and foremost, when you take a look at his combine results, had a phenomenal day on Thursday, ran a 4.64 in the 40, a vertical of 38 over his last 2 seasons at ACU. That young man recorded 133 tackles, 13 and a half sacks, 5 pass breakups, 5 forced fumbles, 3 fumbles recovery, and he is also the reigning Southland Defensive Player of the Year. I look at a guy in the Hunt, and I think he would be the perfect prospect that you want to get late in the draft. Somebody that you can develop, have him be a viable, a really good, solid option in terms of depth purposes, and he is somebody that the Houston Texans can use in special teams as well. And look, he's an edge rusher. When you take a look at this edge position, especially considering the unknown that's surrounding Jonathan Grenard, depending on how that situation is going to play out, I look at the Houston Texans and think to myself, they might be in a position where they might have to count on several guys to help fill the potential vacancy if Jonathan Grenard does not come back. But I had an opportunity to ask Hunt about the possibility of playing for the Houston Texans, and this is what he had to say.
Tutelage of Will Anderson on a D-line like that, I think I have the potential to play at the level he plays. He's a lot more technical, way more polished guy than I am, but learning under somebody like that, and then those that taught him, getting just advice in general, and then that swarm mentality, I think it'd be a great fit for me. I think I can fit into any system. I'm willing to work to do whatever position I need to make. Special teams, have it be, it doesn't matter. So I think I'd love to play in Texas. I'd love to play for the Texans.
Yeah, and I think a lot of guys, like you mentioned, want to be around what this team is building here in Houston, right? And the Texans have formal meetings with several players over the weekend. Missouri defensive end Darius Robinson, NC State linebacker, guy that I really do like, Peyton Willis. You look at the Illinois D tackle, Johnny Newton, Jazeer Newton. They all have formal meetings. Even looking at Kool-Aid McKinstry. So the Texans are out there, right? They want to meet with everybody that they feel could, come in and impact their team. But I think when I look at the defensive line, whether it's D tackle or D end, Byron Murphy stands out. I think for what he can bring to a team, I think his versatility, right? When to play him inside, when to play him at the 3, I think in this NFL and his size, he's not a big, tall guy, 6 foot, but he's strong. He's big. You want to play him at the 5 a little bit. He can play that 3. Also, I look at Mason Smith out of LSU, 6'5", 300-pounder guy, right? He's a guy that I think would be a great late-round option. But I think for Houston, one thing that I believe, just watching the combine, right, and there's going to be a lot of rumors out there. There's going to be a lot of leaks and what this team likes and who this team wants and what is Nick Caserio doing, who will be aggressive, right, this offseason. They have an opportunity to come on because they got 3 7th-round picks. They got an opportunity to come away with some of these guys that are in the later rounds, but really look at 23. What do they do with the number 23 overall pick? And I got to tell you, if Murphy is on the board, right, and if they knock it out the park in free agency and they bring in some very good cornerbacks, I wouldn't be mad at Murphy staying in Houston, staying in Texas and playing for the Houston Texans. I still think Houston needs to go with cornerback at 23 overall because they have a day. Like the corner group stood out. But in terms of D linemen and defensive tackles, I was very impressed with Brandon Fisk, Florida State. Again, Byron Murphy, Texas. Chris Jenkins, Michigan. He had a good combine. Mason Smith, LSU, had a good combine. Trevonte Sweat, Texas. A lot of people was not expecting for him to run that 5.27 40 time. And for a guy that's his size, 6'4", well over 360 pounds, right? Moving like that with a 1.18 yard split, a vertical jump of 26 inches, broad jump of 8'2", right? He's a guy that if you're looking for somebody to be your future D tackle, why not Sweat? And maybe he's more of a guy that you can either get with your original second round pick, or if you really believe in him, maybe trade up for him. But he's a guy that can clog that B gap, the A gap, the inside gap. He's a guy that's going to come in, you can plug and play, and he's going to be impactful for not only the guys around him on that defensive line, but if he is what I think he could be, maybe a Vita Vea type of talent, now your linebackers are thriving. So for Houston, they had an opportunity this weekend to really assess some of the guys that are coming out and say, we like this guy in the draft. Maybe we don't need to focus too much in this area in free agency. Maybe we don't need to put too much too many investments or eggs in one basket in free agency, because we believe that whether it's at 23, whether it's at, was it 56 or 58, whether it's at the second round, whether it's at the third round, there's going to be a guy there, or we could trade up for a guy, because Nick Caserio is known to trade up for these guys that we believe can come in, and if not day 1, day 5, he's a game worker. He's a baller for a defense that clearly, under D'Amico Ryans, you're going to see guys grow and develop into some very good football players. Don't be like Steph Curry and the Warriors Sunday when they played against the Boston Celtics. Don't be like them. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot today. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
It would mean the world to me, I played at Oklahoma for 4 years and transferred back home to Houston, and a lot of that was wanting to present the opportunity to play the position I needed to play, and also play my last season in front of my family right down the road in Houston. So it would mean the world just to be that close to my mom again.
And if you get an opportunity to do so, with you being at UH, D'Amico Ryan's first season, how do you see yourself playing in his defensive swarm mentality?
Yeah, I think I fit perfectly in that. D'Amico reminds me a lot of my previous coach Venables, as far as their defensive mindset. They were both linebackers, coaches, and defensive coordinators before becoming head coaches. So it would just mean the world. I think I fit perfectly with him. I think we would vibe, and I would be a guy that's in his office trying to pick his brain as much as possible.
Defensive version of Tank there.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be awesome.
Welcome back in, ladies and gentlemen, to this Monday installment of Locked On Texans. That was David Agwebu, University of Houston defensive end. He's coming out this year's draft, John. I know we just finished talking about the defensive ends, the defensive linemen, but I think that is a guy that is definitely going to be on the Houston Texans radar. As we transition here to the DBs, the cornerbacks. I know you're dying and itching to get to it. Let me just say this, John. When we were standing there, I believe this was Wednesday, I was excited. We about to hear from Kool-Aid McKinstry. No, that was Thursday. We about to hear from Kool-Aid McKinstry, a guy that's probably number 2 on my draft board, right behind Byron Murphy. And if it wasn't for Coach D'Amico Ryans loving the defensive line so much, he might have been number 1. We waited. He finally came. We talked to him and stuff. Got word that he wasn't going to participate in the combine, and now he is dealing with a Jones fracture in his left foot. It's scary because that is the same injury that Derek Stingley Jr. dealt with during his second season at LSU, and it took Derek Stingley Jr. some time. I don't think the fracture is as serious as Derek Stingley Jr.'s. However, I just hate to know it from that young man, because that was a guy that I would have loved to see the Houston Texans take at 23, because when we did our pre-combine mock draft, I finally came around to the idea of the possibility of the Houston Texans drafting a cornerback at pick number 23.
And I still think that's what the Houston Texans should do. I still think that is the direction they should take. Man, I got to tell you, I knew this cornerback class was good, but just to give you guys some insight, Nate Wiggins, 4.28. Quinion Mitchell, Senior Bowl standout, met with the Houston Texans at the Senior Bowl. Senior Bowl star, 4.33. Jarian Jones, Florida State, 4.38. Max Melton, Rutgers, a guy I just talked about last week, who initially I thought you could pick him up with the number 86 overall pick in that third round, 4.39. DJ James, the Auburn kid, 4.42. Right, they got some guys that came out here and flat out put on a show, right? And I think for Houston, they're Terrion Arnold, right? Alabama kid. A lot of people are, saying that he is the best corner in this draft. He ran a 4.5. For Houston, they will have their options at cornerback. And I think if you want to go early, I'm going to say this, and I don't even think he's going to last to pick 23. But if he is there, right, and Cooper DeJean didn't participate in the four, he didn't do activities, but he's too much of a where do you play him that type of player. And with this first pick for Houston at 23, they need a solidified outside cornerback, even though that there are reports right now by our good friend Aaron Wilson that there is interest between the Houston Texans and Steven Nelson for him to return back to this team, which we've talked about how ideal that would be to pair Steven Nelson with a talented cornerback group by taking a corner at 23. But for me, it's still Nate Wiggins at 23. It is still Nate Wiggins. I still believe that he is the best cornerback in this class. And that 4.2 speed, that solidified it for me because he does so many different things well. When you look at some of his college tape, right, we've talked about it in the past, but I think that speed to match how good he is as a, in technicalities as a cornerback, his form, his technique, I think he is still the number one cornerback in this year's draft. I like Terrion Arnold, but if you ask me, is there a late round guy? I still like either DJ James, the Auburn kid, in the second round, or maybe Max Melton in the third round from Rutgers. Those two guys, I think, had a good showing.
Well, John, before moving on, I do want to ask you this because I'm still high on Kool-Aid McKinstry, regardless of the injury that he has. However, do you think it would be more ideal to bring Steven Nelson back and draft Kool-Aid, knowing that he's dealing with this foot injury, and that way you can give him time to get up to speed? And within his first season, I'm not saying he's going to miss the whole season, but within that first season, he's a guy that can, you could take your time bringing him along, because I still think Kool-Aid is the best corner coming out this year's draft.
If you are asking me, my response to that is absolutely no.
Why?
They need a guy that can come in right now. And not only do they need that, it's not like it's not available. It's not like the talent isn't there. Because the wide receivers, which we'll talk about tomorrow, did they have a weekend, right? I mean, they balled out. The tight end group, I think, had a great combine week, right? So that first round is going to be loaded with talent. Some of these cornerbacks are going to fall. I don't think it's going to be Nate Wiggins. I don't think it's going to be Quinn Mitchell. But between Mitchell, Wiggins, and Arnold, I think if you got a chance to draft one of those three cornerbacks at 23, then you do that. And to take it a step further, because of this injury history, or well, not history, but because of the injury that Kool-Aid is going through right now, to take it a step further, if I could get DJ James in the second round, I do that. I need somebody that I can know and trust can come in and play right now. And I think for Houston, if you look at, some of their history with players that have this injury history problem or has suffered an injury, it takes a little bit longer for them to catch on. Rightfully so. This is the NFL transition from college to the big leagues is totally different. I get it, but I'm not risking that. I am not risking it. I think you got to go with the best available who can come in and play right now.
Well, and I only brought that up because now there's a situation where Steven Nelson is coming in. Now, I get it, I understand it. Last week we played around with the idea of Nelson coming in, but he'll have to take that CB3 role. But I just look at it from a standpoint, if you have an opportunity to draft one of, if not, in my opinion, the best corner in this year's draft, and Kool-Aid, you could either start the season or go through the entire whole season having Kool-Aid be cornerback number 3, keeping Steven Nelson at number 2, because look, at the end of the day, even if Nelson comes back, he's not going to get nothing no longer than a 1-year deal. Move on from him after the 2024 season. Now you got Kool-Aid. He's healthier. Now he's even more up to speed. He'd be ready to go in 2025. And that's who's going to be starting opposite alongside Darius Stingley Jr., moving forward.
So you want to bring Nelson back to be your CB2?
Yeah.
You're not going to get championship football out of that.
Only if Kool-Aid is still at the top of their draft board.
I don't know. I just don't think if they have to have a contingency plan. I'm sorry, I like Steven Nelson. I've been advocating for him to come back. He cannot be your cornerback 2 next year. He can't. He could be a very serviceable player. He is of age now, and according to Big Sarge, what he was hearing over the weekend was that may be scaring off some teams. But he produced last year, and I think Houston should reward him to come back. But understand this: if you are coming back, this is a role that we have for you, that we foresee you playing for us, and we believe that if you can execute in this role, we can actually get somewhere defensively. We can play some championship football defensively for a cornerback or for a secondary that was at the league bottom, the bottom of the league in passing yards allowed last year. So they got to make those upgrades.
Well, majority of them being at the bottom of the league came from the secondary unit, but I think you missed what I'm saying. I'm saying only if Kool-Aid is still at the top of their draft board before this injury. Like, I'm all for them going out and drafting a number 2 cornerback, but if it's Kool-Aid that they still want, then I say it will make even more sense for Steven Nelson to come back and at least start the season off at CB number 2, because regardless of where Kool-Aid goes, they're going to have to take their time with him because of this Jones fracture that he's dealing with right now.
And I'm saying, because of this Jones fracture, he should not be the top cornerback on your list. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in a day, Cody?
First thing I would do is just get one more extra hour of work in.
There we go. Some people would like to get an extra hour of work. Some people may like to run. Some people may like to take a nap, maybe read a book, go watch a movie. It doesn't matter. A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time if we had that extra hour. But the question is, just like I asked Cody, what would you do with that hour? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suitable to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back in, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. We talked about the D-line in the first segment. It is important to scout that unit. I don't believe Houston's going to come away from this draft without getting one of the premier either interior or edge rushers in this year's draft. Same for cornerback. And I still am saying with the number 23 overall pick, the Texans should go with the top corner that's healthy, of course, on the board to pair alongside with Derek Stingley, who we believe at the very least will be, if he's healthy, a Pro Bowl receiver. But now we look at some of the mid-round, later round picks, right? And Cody, you had an opportunity to be out there at Indy, and the guy that you told me about, we talked about, was Texas linebacker Jalen Ford. Is he a mid-round option for the linebacker unit, which, by the way, we expect whoever comes in to be under that wing of D'Amico Ryans and really become a developed linebacker in the NFL, because we've seen it in year one.
I think so, man. I think Ford will be the ideal prospect that the Houston Texans can get in the mid-round. First and foremost, John, you know, we have talked a lot about the D-line, the cornerback. Last week, we talked a lot about the safety unit, and that's just on defense. On the offensive side of the ball, it's like, okay, when and where should they draft and address their wide receiving unit? However, I kind of feel like the linebacker unit at times has kind of been a little bit forgotten in a sense, but that doesn't mean that it is not that important, because it's definitely important for Coach D'Amico Ryans and Nick Caserio to address that unit, but more so just addressing the depth in that unit. And Jalen Ford is one of the prospects who did have an opportunity to meet with the Texans, and this is what he had to say.
You know, so they were just telling me, I talked to the Texans, and they were just telling me about, you know, the main thing is making sure you swarm to the ball, play fast, and be physical. You know, don't really worry about mistakes. Just worry about getting to that ball, you know, having effort, things like that. And they were telling me, you know, if you have those things, then you could be a great linebacker. So, you know, taking that advice and moving it on would really help.
The one thing I love most about being at the combine is that you kind of had a sense of which prospects the Texans are definitely looking at, and Ford is one of them because he is one of the few players that actually said that, look, we had an opportunity to talk about their swarm mentality, and you're not going to start, talking about your swarm mentality defense unless you are really serious thinking about bringing this particular player in. And when you take a look at Jalen Ford, John, you know this because I know you love UT. He is a guy that I definitely feel can definitely come in and help this linebacker unit. He can be a guy that could probably start the season as your depth purposes type of linebacker, but as the season going on, I could definitely see him developing into one of your most prominent linebackers, especially considering that, look, in the next couple of weeks, this is going to be a unit that's probably going to lose the likes of Denzel Perriman. You still don't know what's going to happen with Blake Cashman, even though I've been told there's a possibility that he's going to come back. However, if Blake Cashman comes back, the next question is going to be, can he replicate that same success? So this linebacker unit has a lot of questions surrounding it, but they have an opportunity to solve some of it if they have an opportunity to bring in Jalen Ford from Texas.
So you are going to be shocked when I say this. I'm not that big on Jalen Ford right now.
Wow.
I think Jalen Ford kind of took a dip this past year defensively. I really still like Peyton Willis, NC State, right? Met with the Houston Texans. I like the idea of pairing him alongside Christian Harris. So when I picture what he can bring and what Harris can bring and how they can get creative with that, right? A guy that can really play fast and ferocious downhill, can get after the quarterback and sideline to sideline speed. And when I mean sideline to sideline, when I say sideline to sideline speed, I mean a 4.4 in the 40, right? A 1.5 10-yard split. That guy is an amazing athlete who happens to be 6'4", 330 pounds. And by the time the season starts, it may bulk up to 240. I think athletically he's gifted. I think injury history aside, and we're talking about mid to late round picks, right? Injury history aside, IQ-wise, I think he's smart, right? I think he's a smart football player. And I think he'd be a guy that can come in, can get coached up like we've seen a linebacker be able to get coached up under Demarcus Ryans, and really thrive once he gets an opportunity to kind of prove that, okay, yeah, I can play at the NFL level. Again, athletically, he's amazing. Smart football player, right? Does a very good job of shedding blocks. That's probably should be number one coming from, if we're looking at a linebacker prospect. So do I like Jalen Ford? Let me not say I don't like Jalen Ford, but let me say that I don't think Jalen Ford in the Houston Texans will be a good fit. Thank you guys for listening and watching the Locked On Texans podcast. Tomorrow, we are talking about the receivers because they was fast. And if you want to talk about Texas players, y'all saw it. Y'all saw the new record. We'll be talking about receivers tomorrow because I do think Houston has a chance to really grab some impactful receivers in this year's draft, no doubt about it. But make sure you watch tomorrow. Make sure you continue to watch throughout the week to the Locked On Texans podcast on YouTube under Locked On Texans. Make sure you subscribe, like, and comment. Give me a follow on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
And as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at CodyDavis_24. Once again, it's Cody, COTYDAVIS_24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.